The name Jezebel is not merely a historical footnote. It is a cultural indictment, a chilling synonym for corruption, manipulation, and the deadliest kind of female ambition. Her story, spanning from the sun-drenched coasts of Phoenicia to the dusty plains of Israel, is a powerful and unsettling narrative about how a single, unrepentant will. We know the consequence. A kingdom shattered. How did a princess from a foreign land achieve such devastating power? What kind of crucible forges a woman capable of standing defiantly on the edge of her? We begin not in the palaces of the conquered, but in the majestic shadow of Sidon. Jezebel was born the daughter of King Ethbaal, not merely royalty, but the heir to a formidable kingdom, steeped in ancient, often brutal traditions. From her first breath, she was marked for greatness, or perhaps for infamy. While other noble daughters learned needlepoint and graceful curtsies, Jezebel was tutored in the sharp, cold calculus of court politics. She mastered the art of observation, learning to dissect a man's intentions with a glance, to wield flattery as a weapon, and to never mistake sentiment for strategy. She understood that bloodlines granted authority, but true enduring power was earned through manipulation, control, and the unwavering ability to bend others to her will. Her mind was a fortress, her instincts a razor's edge. She was not destined to be an ornament. She was forged to be a force. Her future was not to be dictated by ancient custom, but by a singular burning ambition to rule. Jezebel's strategic mind was not limited to the palace walls of Sidon. It spanned the trade routes and political borders of the ancient world. She understood that power often needed a new stage, and her own kingdom, while prosperous, offered limits to her boundless ambition. Whispers soon reached her court concerning the fractured state of the kingdom of Israel, specifically its king Ahab. Ahab had inherited the throne of the northern kingdom, but his rule was characterized by a distinct lack of the vital fire necessary for true authority. He was a monarch, hungry for the stability and prestige a foreign alliance would bring, but fatally, he was also weak and easily swayed. To the common eye, Ahab was a king seeking a queen. To Jezebel, he was merely an opportune vessel, a means to an end. This was not a pursuit of romance, but a calculated political acquisition. She did not seek Ahab's love or admiration. She sought the fertile ground his kingdom offered for the seeds of her influence. She saw the division in Israel as an advantage, its spiritual confusion as an opening. The proposal for marriage was accepted without a moment's hesitation. Her agreement, less a joyful pledge and more a signing of a geopolitical treaty. Jezebel departed the familiar sun-drenched shores of her homeland, crossing the waters to Israel, carrying not just a dowry of wealth, but a formidable cultural and spiritual baggage. She saw the journey not as a passage to marriage, but as a march toward domination. She arrived in Israel, a land where the people spoke a different language and worshipped a singular, austere God, Yahweh. But these cultural barriers did not faze her. She was a conqueror who had arrived not merely to sit beside a king, but to rule through him. Israel, in her eyes, was merely a canvas, awaiting the bold, unyielding stroke of her will. The moment Jezebel set foot on Israeli soil, the balance of power in Samaria shifted irrevocably. She was received with awe, regal, foreign, and breathtakingly beautiful, but it was the cold, calculating intelligence radiating from her presence, not her physical elegance, that Jezebel did not simply adapt to the court of King Ahab. She redefined it. She was the flame, and Ahab, a mere candle in the wind, provided the platform she needed. It quickly became terrifyingly clear that Ahab, though a monarch by title, was a figurehead. His kingdom, fragmented by internal struggles and suffering from his own lack of resolve, desperately needed the strong, unwavering hand he could not provide. Jezebel filled this vacuum with immediate, decisive, and brutal efficiency. She did not wait for influence to accrue naturally. Her first mandate was the systematic restructuring of the court itself. Loyal advisors who had served the house of Israel for generations were swiftly, often silently replaced by Jezebel's own hand-picked loyalists, men and women whose allegiance was owed solely to the queen, not the king, and certainly not to the God of Israel. Her power was a creeping vine, twisting around the foundations of the kingdom, choking out any dissenting voices. Those who dared to oppose her vision, to speak of the old ways, or to question her authority, were silenced. Sometimes with public disgrace, more often through the chilling finality of execution. She operated through a masterful combination of fear and patronage. Reward those who served her ruthlessly, and destroy those who stood in her path unequivocally. Jezebel was not content with merely co-ruling. She was determined to make Israel her kingdom, a mirror reflecting her Sidonian heritage, divorced entirely from the ancient covenant established by Yahweh. She saw the indigenous culture and faith as an obstacle, a weak sentimental barrier against centralized. Her strategic brilliance lay in her understanding that true political control is impossible without spiritual control. To conquer the body of the state, one must first enslave its soul. Therefore, the restructuring of the court was merely the prelude to a far more profound and devastating campaign, the eradication of the worship of Yahweh. Her ambition was a force of nature, unpredictable, unstoppable, and utterly indifferent to the moral or human cost. Every decree she issued, every alliance she forged, and every life she extinguished served a single monumental goal: to establish her will as the unchallenged law of the land. Making her not merely a queen, but the unchallenged conqueror of Israel's destiny. She wielded her influence not with the finesse of a diplomat, but with the brute force of a tyrant, ensuring that in the halls of power, her name became synonymous with absolute, terrifying, and irrevocable control. This meticulous and chilling consolidation of power laid the groundwork for the ensuing spiritual warfare that would define her legacy forever. With the political scaffolding firmly in place, Jezebel turned her gaze toward the true battlefield, the spirit. She recognized that the worship of Yahweh, a deity demanding exclusivity, moral purity, and loyalty, was the single greatest obstacle to her totalitarian rule. A God who spoke directly to prophets who held kings accountable was antithetical to her vision of a state where power flowed only from the monarch. Her campaign was not a subtle integration of foreign customs. It was a violent, systematic spiritual coup d'etat. Jezebel was not merely introducing a new god. She was dismantling the very covenant that held Israel together as a nation. Her first acts were grand, conspicuous, and intended to dominate the landscape and the public imagination. In the heart of Samaria, she oversaw the construction of a magnificent towering temple to Baal, the Phoenician god of storms, fertility, and the harvest. This structure was a profound visual statement, eclipsing the humble altars and traditions of Yahweh worship. It was a tangible monument to her supremacy and the superiority of her Sidonian faith. Simultaneously, she instituted a vast state-sponsored priesthood for Baal and his female counterpart, numbering hundreds of priests and prophets who were housed, fed, and lavishly supported directly from the royal treasury. This move immediately shifted the economic and social center of gravity, making allegiance to Baal a prerequisite for prosperity and advancement within the kingdom. But Jezebel's revolution went beyond mere construction. It was a campaign of eradication. The priests and prophets of Yahweh, men who dared to speak the ancient truth, were targeted for immediate and brutal suppression. She unleashed a calculated purge, a terrifying hunt for those who clung to the original faith. Altars dedicated to Yahweh were torn down. The prophets, the very voice of the true God, were silenced, hunted, and executed in cold blood. The fear she instilled was paralyzing. Those who survived were forced into hiding, living in caves and desolate places, sustained only by the desperate loyalty of a few courageous individuals like the palace administrator Obadiah. Jezebel wanted more than just compliance. She demanded conversion. She required the people to abandon the austere, invisible God of their ancestors for the tangible. She believed that Baal, who promised immediate rain and tangible fertility, was a far more practical and politically useful God than Yahweh, whose rewards were often spiritual and long-term. This cultural and spiritual genocide was the cornerstone of her reign, a ruthless, unyielding attempt to redefine the very soul of the kingdom, cementing her power by destroying Israel's relationship with its foundational. Her reign became a dark age for true believers, a period defined by the smoke of pagan sacrifice and the blood of the righteous, underscoring her terrifying resolve to allow nothing, not custom, not history, and certainly not God, to stand in the way of her total control. This was not tolerance. It was total war against the spiritual identity of Israel. Jezebel's spiritual purge met its immovable obstacle in Elijah, the Tishbite, a prophet whose mere existence was a living, breathing challenge to the queen's idolatrous sovereignty. Recognizing that this conflict could not be won by decree or execution, Elijah forced the issue into the light with a momentous challenge, a public contest on Mount Carmel. He summoned King Ahab and the vast state-sponsored priesthood of Baal to witness a confrontation where the God who answered by fire would be declared the true Lord of Israel. The spiritual fate of the entire nation hung in the tense mountain air. The spectacle that unfolded was both frantic and pathetic. The 450 prophets of Baal began their appeals, their voices rising in desperate, wild fervor. From dawn until the afternoon, they cried out. They danced, and in a desperate, escalating display, they carried out extreme rituals with swords and spears, hoping to see any sign of response from their silent stone idol. But Baal remained silent and unresponsive. Jezebel's supposed spiritual authority collapsed in that heavy silence, revealed as empty and powerless. Then, Elijah stepped forward, the lone figure of genuine faith. He gently mocked their false confidence, then repaired the ruined altar of the Lord. In a bold act of trust, he ordered that the altar, the wood, and the sacrifice be completely soaked with water, with 12 jars of water, until the trench around it overflowed. Finally, he offered a simple, powerful prayer to the God of Israel. The response was immediate, terrifying, and conclusive. Fire rained down from the heavens, consuming not only the offering and the wood, but licking up the stones of the altar and evaporating the voluminous water. Jezebel's revolution was incinerated in a single fiery instant. The people fell upon their faces, crying out, "The Lord, He is God." Though her spiritual dominance was destroyed, the queen's iron will remained unbent, ensuring her final desperate and vengeful response would soon follow. The fiery judgment on Mount Carmel was not merely a theological debate. It was a brutal public execution of Jezebel's religious authority. Immediately following the miracle, Elijah, acting on the clear command of the covenant, ordered the execution of the 450 prophets of Baal. This was a decisive blow, a systematic dismantling of the entire state-sponsored priesthood that formed the backbone of the queen's spiritual power. Israel had witnessed the truth, and the lie of Baal was shattered. Yet the woman who orchestrated the spiritual war refused to bow. When King Ahab recounted the terrifying events, the fire, the water, the slaughter, Jezebel's heart, hardened by years of absolute power, did not soften in repentance. It boiled over with blinding fury. She did not concede defeat to Yahweh. She took the divine intervention as a personal, unforgivable insult. Her vengeance was swift and terrifyingly personalized. She immediately sent a messenger to Elijah, delivering a death threat, cloaked in an ominous oath. "So may the gods do to me, and more, Also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." This was Jezebel at her core, a woman who faced the supernatural power of the true God and responded with raw human arrogance and a thirst for blood. Her threat, however, was still rooted in immense temporal power. Elijah, though fearless in his faith, recognized the danger and fled into the wilderness exhausted and fearful. But even in his retreat, the narrative shifts back to the true source of power. God did not abandon his prophet. An angel brought him food and water, sustaining him for the long journey. And Jezebel's rage had successfully driven Elijah into hiding. Yet her greatest victory was fleeting. For the stage was now set not for her triumph, but for the final, inevitable judgment upon her house. Jezebel's fury may have driven the prophet into the desert, but it could not outrun the inevitable judgment of Yahweh. The reckoning for her tyranny, her idolatry, and her shedding of innocent blood was not a slow decay, but a swift, violent decapitation of her dynasty. The instrument of this divine wrath arrived in the form of Jehu, a ruthless military commander, appointed by prophetic anointing to tear down the entire house of Ahab. His mission was absolute: to cleanse Israel by eliminating every remnant of the queen's corruption. The moment Jehu rode into Jezreel, the capital city, Jezebel knew her final hour had come. She was an aging queen facing destiny, yet she refused to surrender her pride. In a last iconic act of defiance, she adorned herself in her finest robes, painted her eyes, and crowned her head. This was not preparation for a meek death. It was a powerful symbolic statement. She would face her executioner not as a penitent, but as a queen, regal, powerful, and utterly unbowed. She positioned herself at the palace window, greeting Jehu with a scornful, challenging question, comparing him to the infamous traitor Zimri. Jehu's response was brief, cold, and final. He called to the eunuch standing nearby, "Throw her down." With that command, the queen, who had once commanded armies and manipulated kings, was betrayed by her own servants. Jezebel was hurled from the high window, crashing to the ground below. Her blood splattered the wall, and the horses a gruesome end to a life of calculated cruelty. Jehu, indifferent to her fate, paused only briefly to eat. Later, when he commanded her body to be buried, it was too late. The prophecy spoken long ago by Elijah was fulfilled with terrifying precision. The dogs had come and devoured her flesh, leaving only the queen who had sought to enslave Israel's soul was denied even the dignity of a grave. Her death was not just the end of a life. It was the violent physical destruction of an era of spiritual darkness. The gruesome fall of Jezebel was the definitive end of a dark era, but the ripples of her reign continued to shape Israel's destiny. The worship of Yahweh was formally restored, but the kingdom was left deeply scarred, requiring generations to heal from the spiritual trauma and political fragmentation Jezebel's ambition had inflicted. Ultimately, Jezebel's story transcends the mere accounting of a queen's death. It endures as a powerful and chilling moralistic warning, echoing through the ages. She is not remembered for her beauty or her regal origins, but for her utter ruthlessness and her defiance against the divine. Her legacy is one of unchecked power, the devastating consequence of a human will seeking to supplant the will of God, to replace profound spiritual truth with pragmatic self-serving idolatry. Her reign proves that even the most formidable empires, built on manipulation and fear, are subject to an inescapable reckoning. Jezebel's final defiant act at the window was her last attempt at control, but her undignified end, her flesh consumed by dogs. Outside the very walls, she ruled, confirmed the ultimate truth. No one, not even the most wicked and powerful queen, can escape the consequences of their own actions. She remains the eternal symbol of a soul corrupted by power, a stark reminder that true authority lies not with the transient ruler,